Welcome to Sit the Cinema, the only podcast to complete the Tour de France on a unicycle. I'm Alex.
That was a really good one. I'm Andres.
Thank you. And today we're going to be talking a little bit about the exploration of French animation. I'm personally very stoked about this. I'm very passionate about animation as a medium, and so this was an absolute treat for me. But before we dive in, Andreas, what are we sipping on?
So, Alex, you said we're watching what animation?
French.
So we're drinking a French 75. This is just gin, bubbly, lemon, simple syrup, or watered down sugar.
Or just straight sugar,
yeah.
in the case that we had here. And a champagne flute. You know, I was actually, when I was making sure that I didn't screw up the recipe for the French 75, I found that apparently the French 75 has seen a vast evolution over the course of the last century. Apparently, it used to be served with grenadine in it, and a couple of other, kind of mixers in a very different glass, and it just kind of evolved over time, much like French animation. So I know I'm insufferable. Also, throw out there, yes, I'm wearing glasses, and yes, you have not seen me wear glasses before. I've got a thing going on with my eye, so we're just gonna let that be what it is.
I also have an eye thing.
It's
called bad vision.
These are blue light glasses. I'm trying to save y'all. So, so today we're gonna be talking about French animation, and to kick things off, I really want to talk a little bit about, I think, what was, at least for the sake of this particular episode, our first introduction, the first thing that we watched for it, which would be Fantastic Planet.
Mm-hmm. Which we meant to talk about in the last episode.
We sure did, because
after we finished filming the last episode, we said like 15 movies that we were like, shit, we didn't say that.
Yeah. So we're gonna do better about that. In particular, the reason why we wanted to talk about Fantastic Planet last episode is because the score is phenomenal.
Snazzy.
Absolutely snazzy. It's got this funky, jazzy vibe to it that has been actually a huge inspiration for a lot of other musicians out there. I know MF Doom, Tyler the Creator, Mac Miller, and several other rappers have sampled the music from that soundtrack just for the sake of, because it's so groovy. It kind of, the more you watch the movie, if you just listen to the score on its own, which would you consider it a score or a soundtrack?
It's a score.
Yeah,
it was composed.
Okay. The more you listen to that score, the more you understand how sampleable it is.
Yeah.
And it's also just great background music. I recommend it. But that's not the focus.
The focus is the little blue people.
The focus is the little blue people.
Or the big blue people.
Right. So this was the first time that either of us have seen Fantastic Planet or Planet des Sauvages, or I think is what it is.
Wow,
I'm trying. What were your kind of like highlights?
Well, we already talked about the music, so I'm not gonna mention that again.
Sure.
But I just thought the take on, we're seeing the technology, the idea of what everything would look like, just the imagination that went behind it. It was just obviously meant to not be watched sober.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
But
it's a very psychedelic trip. The entire story, and just to kind of throw this out there, so you know a little bit about what we're talking about. The main concept is essentially that there is this planet where these giant blue people that have this advanced civilization, they live way, way longer than humans ever do. And there are people also on this planet who, by relative size, are probably about, I guess, the height of maybe a mouse by our comparison. And they're treated as pets and something that don't carry any intellect and something that can be disposed of, and maybe even pests. Well, definitely pests. They get exterminated.
Yeah, I mean, the closest thing you can compare it to is literally rats, especially the fact that they're living in the park and everything like that, going through trash, all that, like living off of what they can steal from humans. They were essentially rats.
Yeah, 100%. And you kind of get this exploration of the planet over the course of the story, which follows one particular human or Ohm by translation. And one of the things that I found so refreshing about this, and I actually found quite telling of other animation that comes out of France is that there's a real there's a lot of space to breathe.
Mhm.
They let the environment be sort of a character in its own right.
Mhm.
They as they kind of travel, they as characters kind of travel across the planet, there's a lot of time and attention to detail given to the environment and like the weird, trippy ways that it works
Yeah,
together.
there's like general wonder when you watch it, in a sense, how you would feel if you were in home
Yeah.
on this planet with all these things, like all the little critters you see throughout the movie. Like I said earlier, the technology, it's just, it really does feel like a foreign planet. Whereas I feel
Hmm.
like with a lot of sci-fi that we're used to nowadays, everything kind of looks the same font. You know
Yeah.
what I mean?
Well, and allow me to just kind of chime in here because I found that across all of these movies. It was such a refreshing take on animation to see just how versatile they're willing to be with their styles. Like
Hmm.
all of these animated movies that we're going to talk about today are so heavily stylized in a particular way such that it emphasizes the movie, not in a way that it becomes more palatable to the audience.
Yeah.
And in fact, several moments in Fantastic Planet and other movies we're going to talk about were downright gross and unsettling to a
Yeah.
high degree.
I mean, yeah, and we're also, mostly from our experience with American animation, for lack of a better term, the Pixarification of it,
Yep.
or the turning animation exclusively into something for children. Whereas with a lot of these films, it was very much the opposite of that,
Yeah.
where children should not be watching
No.
them. And it's very cool that personality is allowed to flourish within them. We don't have, it's not like when you see the studio that pops up before the movie starts, you know exactly what it's going to look like.
Yeah.
Oh, it's Pixar, it's going to look like this. Oh, it's DreamWorks, it's probably going to look like this.
Hmm.
Illumination, yada, yada, yada. So it's very cool that it is more so down to the individual artist, director, art director, whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I'm pretty sure I was not really able to verify this, but so the director is Rene Laloux, or whatever a French dialect would sound like with that, but Rene Laloux. And he did a couple of other movies that are on our watch list that we want to watch, but we didn't quite get to. I did watch one short by him though called The Snails or Les
I watched
Escargots.
that today.
Did you?
Bro, you cannot tell me that is not a kaiju movie.
No, 100%. Snails is kaiju, and the farmer. So the idea is like this farmer can't grow crops until he starts to cry, and so he has to cry all over his plants, and they grow like crazy, and then snails eat them, and then snails grow like crazy, destroy everything, get a little bit horny, and then
Very horny.
and then it ends.
Yeah,
in like 11 minutes.
Like that. It's a roller coaster for sure, man. But I really felt it when he's just the sequence of him just crying and walking and just like
he put his whole
Badusi.
animosity into those plants. But the style also, I'm pretty sure, was a direct influence on the way that Monty Python and the Holy Grail did their animation.
Oh, okay, word.
And definitely was a huge influence on the way that South Park wound up doing their animation later. And the reason I say that is if you take a look at it, you'll notice it kind of has the appearance of basically individual paper parts of maybe a body, kind of just like swirling around, like joints can do 360s and stuff like that. But definitely a must watch and a real treat to kind of like kick off our French animation exploration.
Yeah, absolutely. It also kind of vaguely reminded me growing up as a little Spanish boy. I wrote a lot of like European like children's books. It reminded me a lot of like the art styles I would see in those books specifically, which makes sense because it is a more hand drawn like kind of.
It was 1973, so it was hand drawn. These were individual plates that were put on top of each other. So if you've ever noticed animation from like 90s and earlier on, how you can kind of see certain aspects of the frame or the scenery are kind of like paler, and then there's certain ones that are like much more vibrant, and you're just in your mind that for some reason that rock that is more vibrant is going to be the one thing that moves in this scene. It's because they were individual plates put on top of each other, and basically pictures were taken and strung together. You probably already knew that.
I didn't. No, I didn't. Yeah, I'm learning here.
Yeah, so that's how early animation was done, and it's just I don't know. I'm a huge fan of the medium, like I said, and so it was really fun to watch. And I think another aspect of Fantastic Planet that I also noticed as a trend throughout a lot of the movies we're going to talk about is that in France, dialogue is not important or necessary, purely optional.
Yeah, you have a lot of films with zero dialogue on
Mhm.
this list.
So with that, dialogue is kind of a side character or just purely optional when we're walking through a lot of these movies, in stark contrast to, I think, American animation, which not only has become, not recently, and I'm not talking about the last couple of years because I think we've seen a resurgence in creativity, but homogeneity in animation style, as well as kind of a constant need to grab your attention. And that is just not the case with at least the curated list of French animation that we're watching. For the sake of it, let's just go ahead and shout out Jack McFarlane on Letterboxd for
for making that list,
for making this French animation list, because that was a huge help to be able to determine not only what was real French animation, but what wasn't just movies that were based in France. That was surprisingly difficult to get a list about.
Yeah, honestly, I can't even say how many times I looked at that list throughout the prep for this, bro.
Yeah, no, hugely helpful. Thank you, Jack McFarlane. But going back to dialogue not being important, that you obviously have to talk about the Red Turtle if you're going to talk about that, because that movie has no dialogue at all. In fact,
well, they say "hey" like twice, like they yell it out.
Oh, that's true.
Yeah.
That's true. There is technically a voice actor. I'm sure he got a couple of cents for it. And there's several points in the movie where there's just no sound at all, which I found uniquely jarring.
I thought it was really powerful in sequences where like the giant wave comes in and like all the plants, like you hear like all the bamboo and stuff like snap.
Yeah.
That crunch, that sound had so much more of a piercing element to it.
Had a lot of character.
Exactly. Also, I don't know if it's just because I was watching it with headphones on, but like it just really, I think that might have just made it hit a little bit more.
Yeah.
But it was really sick to see something unfold solely through visual storytelling for, what was it, like an 80-minute runtime?
Yeah.
Also, I just want to say, I think it's absolutely funny how homie was trying desperately to leave that island until a girl shows up and he's like, actually, I'm good. I can stay.
Yeah, that hurt to see.
I was thinking that the whole time. I was like, come on, dude.
No, and well, okay, so I want to get back to his relationship with the turtle in a moment.
Yeah.
But before we do that, I do want to kind of I do kind of want to talk about the actual animation style and the way. So this had like a painted quality to a lot of the background, a lot of the atmosphere. And it was beautiful. And one thing that I noticed is that there were very few shots. I think I could count on one hand the number of shots in this movie where there was actually a panning camera.
And if I remember correctly, I think this was the one that specifically was done in collaboration with Studio Ghibli.
Yes, it was. Which I love the collaboration between the French and the Japanese.
Dude, they just really be loving.
They get it.
Their doodles.
They absolutely get it. And with the not panning the camera, I thought was interesting because it really does make the island the kind of focal point, or at the very least, there's also, just to kind of like continue on, the camera is very, and I know it's animated, but the animated camera,
they start to direct it, you know, and plan it.
The frame is very far away. So vast majority of the time, your characters, what few you have, are very small, which gives you this inherent feeling on how much the environment does not care about the struggles and woes of this stranded individual on this island. So it's panned away, makes him look small. It focuses on the island and he has to move through it, which I thought was an interesting element of the visual storytelling. And you don't get a lot of dialogue, and what moments there are sound, it's like these really piercing moments or this really lulling, beautiful music.
Yeah. And
it just curates, you know, I saw someone add it to a list of movies on Letterboxd where it was just like, what was the point of the story? It's like, yeah, but the vibes, like,
exactly, dude.
It was purely an atmospheric piece. What were your general kind of like takeaways?
Well, just going off of what you said just now, with how wide the frames were frequently throughout the film, when it was up close and intimate, specifically in those sections where it was the husband and the wife, for lack of better character names,
Yeah.
where they're like closely embracing or things like that, it just had a bit more gut punch to it and more weight to it because you're not used to being so close up on them. For a lot of the film, or for at least the first portion of the film, you're kind of wondering, okay, but like, yes, he's stranded on an island, but what's the point? And then you get to the last sequence of the film and you're like, oh, this movie is about everything in life.
Yeah.
That last 5 minutes, man,
Made everything.
dude, just really gelled it all together and just really made you feel every emotion on the spectrum you can about your own mortality, about your own life and how it's unfolding, what you do with your time. Because essentially, I think a big theme or message in this film is time.
Yeah.
This dude is stressing, trying to get off this island. He's frantically trying to do it, running out of time to do it. And then the turtle, I guess we should just also address this. The turtle becomes a woman after he murders it.
A red turtle, specifically.
He kills a turtle that is keeping him from leaving the island. And then she turns into a woman.
He has a child with this turtle woman.
Yes.
And then she dissolves into a turtle again.
Yeah, after he dies.
Which I'm going to let you finish what you're about to say, but I have questions for you about that ending before we move on.
Yeah, but also, I just want to say, if I was her, I would not have forgave him.
No, not
you
at all.
murdered me.
You literally
I'm not spending my life with you. Are you kidding me?
Dude, in like a bad way, just flip the turtle on its back and just
So
let it
brutal.
roast in the sun.
For God knows how long.
Yeah.
Also, a really cool detail that I enjoyed was when she has her hair tied up,
Yeah.
it looks like a turtle shell.
Yeah.
Did you notice that?
I did.
Okay.
I did.
What was I originally saying?
You were talking about, I don't know.
Time. Also, you can say the same thing about once their son is born. He comes to a point where he wants to leave the island. He spent his time there. He wants to spend the rest of his time elsewhere. He understands that
he becomes one with other turtles.
Exactly. Yeah. Which I thought was just beautiful.
I thought it was beautiful. It probably sounds ridiculous when we're talking about it, but like
it kind of is.
It kind of, and
but
it is
so beautiful.
It is beautiful. It's I mean, animated stuff. Like it's gonna sound weird to explain. It would sound weird to explain Zootopia, but like that is what it is. And speaking of Zootopia, the red turtle.
I knew it was a segue.
The red turtle lost Best Animated Feature to Zootopia in 2017. So did My Life as a Zucchini. And I'm not ready to move on to My Life as a Zucchini because I have one last question about the red turtle, but I just had to note that really quick. But most of the films that we're talking about today have either been nominated for or won tons of awards internationally. So take that to the credit of, it may sound weird when we're talking about it, but there's a lot of weight in these pieces. So my last question about the red turtle before we move on is, was there ever really a woman, do you think? Or was it in his head, deserted man, alone?
This is like Lost
There's
all over
an
again.
easily accessible turtle available. I mean, I'm not saying he's a turtle banger, but I'm not saying he's not. I mean, it's uncomfortable, but what do you make of?
I would like to believe that the turtle did become a woman, actually. But also maybe he just died.
Yeah.
So, and just viewed his life through that lens.
Yeah.
But I think it's cool if he didn't, and the turtle was an actual lesson that he learned and used to better himself. Going forward. Also, I just want to say they were both very absent parents.
Oh, 100%.
They were just letting that kid run everywhere.
Oh, dude, and he fell down the same hole that he did.
Yeah,
when
dude.
they filmed. That was one of the only times that there was an actual pan shot, was when they fall off this cliff into this mini lagoon or something like that. That's like blocked off by rocks.
Yeah. And he did not jump in after him.
No.
But also making all kinds of ruckus.
It was like, you're half turtle, you got this.
Exactly, dude. You should know.
Yeah.
But anywho, we digress.
We do digress.
Yeah.
One other movie that I just want to talk about really quick when it comes to, well, I guess there's two movies left on our list that don't really have a whole lot of dialogue that I would like to discuss. And those would both be very heavily musical movies. And that would be Triplets of Belleville and Interstella, 5 or 4 5 if you're going from
5. Yeah.
yeah that many fives.
Yeah.
So with Triplets of Belleville and Interstella 555, there's like no dialogue. There's definitely no there's oh my God, yeah, there's no dialogue in Interstella 5555. And there's like no real dialogue in Triplets of Belleville except for maybe what's announced on the radio in the background.
Yeah.
I mean, you literally don't even get English captions for it because it's so irrelevant. But their music plays a big theme there. And, we did just do an episode where we talked a lot about music in film. So given that both of these pieces have that as like a common element, what are your kind of, I don't know, what do you take out of that and how does that contribute to the medium?
I mean, with Interstellar 5555, I think it's a little unique where they really had the music before they had the visual. A lot of the time, you have the story and then you create the score around it. Interstellar was the opposite. So they kind of just had to forge the story off of the feeling of the music, and that creates kind of a uniqueness to it. With Triplets, first and foremost, I just want to say those triplets are just Haim in 30 years.
You're
but
not wrong. Does Haim eat a lot of frogs? One can only assume.
One can only assume. But I think the music definitely is heavy in it, but I think with Triplets specifically, kind of the not grotesqueness but uniqueness of the animation does more than dialogue would in that situation.
100%. And you're not wrong to call it gross. I mean, it is gross. I mean, one could have nightmares about the noses alone in that film. It's
homeboy pedaling the scrawny.
Yeah, absolutely. They're panting like dogs. It's they're the French depiction of America.
Yeah,
with a Statue of Liberty not only being this massively obese figure, but literally holding up a cheeseburger as opposed to a torch.
They really did not hold back.
No, it was pretty heavy-handed. I would say every aspect of the animation in that movie was heavily exaggerated, which again kind of adds to like how everything is so uniquely stylized. There is no homogeneity in the way that we've talked, you and I privately have talked a little bit about kind of the Pixarification of animation and how we suffered that over the last maybe like the 20 years or so before Spider-Verse came in and started to kick things up.
That's what I was about to say, that now everything's kind of going the Spider-Verse direction with the new Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles movie that came out last year, or even that, I think it was Kid Cudi that released that animated film for Netflix that looks like Spider-Verse.
Yep. And even to smaller but certainly noticeable degrees with the latest Puss in Boots movie.
Yeah, to some extent. Yeah. But that's a good shout.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's you definitely would not see any American studio doing a style like Triplets.
Yeah.
First of all, because I feel like there's a lot more concern over here with everything being very visually pleasing and easy to look at and polished, and they're thinking about the child audience specifically.
Mass appeal.
Exactly. Yeah. How many people can we sell this to? How many people can we sell toys to? Can we make a TV spin-off, this and that?
Yeah.
So they want everything to be as easy to look at as possible.
Yeah.
And with that, you lose so many tools that are in the animation toolkit.
Yeah.
Because like I was saying, dude, the animation does more than dialogue could. Yeah, you can have a line saying some commentary about what you think about American culture or whatever, but by depicting them in that way, you're doing so much more.
Yeah, and there's literally no room for, disagreement about what the point of that depiction was. It's very clear. And you make me a good point, and it makes me think of when I was looking at some of the directors for these films that we're talking about and the studios that were involved. It's to not have a massive, DreamWorks, Pixar, and Disney kind of conglomerate that controls so much of animation and illumination. When you're in France, you don't have those big studios that you're releasing through. So what I've noticed is that a lot of these directors of these animated features maybe put out 1 to 3 other films,
Mm-hmm.
and the rest of them were kind of shorts that led up to their career,
Mm-hmm.
but they're not putting out tons and tons more. And same with the production studios. Like the production studios maybe had a high end in a handful of animated films, but they were also the ones behind other larger live action animated films. Like
Mm-hmm.
I think it was My Life as a Zucchini was had the same production company involved as Amelie.
Is it Studio Canal?
I think yes.
They're
Yeah.
like, as far as like European films, they're working on stuff in France, Spain, England, like all
Yeah.
over. They're like, but the thing is, they're so spread out. It's not, they're not specifically animation like you were saying.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so it almost feels like there's more room for individuality because you don't have the mass companies that you have to live up to.
Mm-hmm.
And so you almost go into it with an expectation that you're not going to be making $600 million off of this movie to begin with, but that wasn't the point of you making it.
Mm-hmm.
Am I making sense?
No, yeah, you're 100% making sense. Yeah.
Okay, because it just, I don't know, it stood out to me. It's not something that I did like deep research into, and I'll be honest, audience, but it did stand out to me because these are films that, like I said, were up for major awards and generally lost to Disney
Yeah,
almost
man.
every time.
Yeah. And it just kind of goes with the general theme of what Bong Joon-ho said back when he won in
1-inch subtitles.
Yeah, but also he said, yeah, the Oscars are a very local film festival, verbatim. So the fact that Parasite is the first Asian, or I don't think it was first foreign film to win Best Picture, but first non-English film at least to win in such an extended period of time.
Yeah.
When I can go to almost any year, and 90% of the time my favorite film is not, or what I think is the best film is not American.
Yeah.
So and that carries over to animation, and you see a lot of things nominated for animation that just have no business being called high quality. They're just, sometimes it feels like they're just filling in slots when there's so many better works elsewhere that they won't even look at.
Agreed. And before we move on to what I think is the premium example of that, I just have a couple of tidbits to say about Triplets of Belleville and Interstella 5555. So with Interstella 5555, this was actually originally, the ideation of it came about when Daft Punk was recording in the recording studio for their Discovery album. And originally they wanted it to potentially be live action. They just some sort of story of potentially tackling oppression and the machinery of like life was what they wanted to tackle. And when live action didn't really pan out, they reached out to frick, I forget his name. I literally said it to you before we even started recording.
I do not remember.
It's okay. A person in Japan who has done a lot of like rock opera type things in animation and manga or in anime, and he worked with Toei Studio to put this together, and I just think that that's a fantastic way to go about it. Like I think that's so freaking cool.
Also, I just want to say, I don't think live action would have been as impactful or effective as animation in this case.
No, not at all.
That just like proves you know how there's a movement now where everyone wants something animated to be turned into live action.
Yeah,
like they won't really consider it a real
like it's
thing.
not real. It's not real film or whatever. It's not worth it.
But there's just so many things that are just best done in animation. You don't have to, like, a big thing is people are recently talking about how like the animated Star Wars stuff doesn't really count. Like with the new Ahsoka show, they're covering the same things that are already like frame for frame from the animated shows, but now it's like actually considered part of it because it's live action, and that's stupid, bro.
I agree.
So things like Interstellar 5555 just build off of animation so much more than they could off of a live action production. Because how are you going to get all that color, light, effect, beauty and capture like the feeling of that music through live action, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, animation just kind of allows, I mean, if you can imagine it, you can put it to pen and paper, or, animation studio or whatever, as it were. But that doesn't always translate to live action. It doesn't always certainly doesn't always look good in live action. And I think that you're highly discounting your own experience if you discount animation as a medium. And you can get some really, really heartfelt messages through that medium too. But to kind of bring it back to what we were talking about in terms of awards, Triplets of Belleville lost the let me read this again, best animated feature, and it got nominated for best original song, but actually lost in the Academy Awards to Finding Nemo. Which
Finding Nemo's pretty good.
Finding Nemo is pretty good,
and it's more accessible. And when it comes down to the Oscars, a lot of the time, what's more accessible is going to see more success.
Yes, absolutely. But a movie that I think is perfectly accessible and probably should have won, Ernest and Celestine.
I cannot describe to you how much I love this movie.
Ernest and Celestine may be the most adorable, inarguably, movies that has ever existed.
It's just about being friends.
It's just about being friends.
Why can't a mouse and a bear be a friend? Which is honestly, when you break it down, it's a beautiful message that we should all be able to get along with each other, live with each other, together, unity, all that. But also, oh my God.
Yeah, it's just adorable. Also, Ernest and Celestine said, fuck the cops, fuck the law. And they said, fuck segregation.
Dude,
so...
exactly. Powerful stuff. This is like, I would say, maybe I'm saying this because there's bears in both films, but this is definitely Paddington core.
Yeah, it is. It is 100% Paddington core because it is adorable, but also so Ernest and Celestine has like a watercolor kind of style of animation,
and
where
it was so versatile.
Yeah, the corners of the screen sometimes aren't even painted; they're still white. Like it feels very much like raw watercolor, which is beautiful because Celestine is a painter, and maybe this is her work. It's beautiful.
Dude, there's one part in particular. I think it's when they first meet, and he like picks her up out of the trash can, and it cuts to her perspective of like what she's waking up to.
Yeah,
and as she like, it's like she's opening her eyes, and like the painting is like being done as he's like going in. That's so sick, man.
It's beautiful. It's beautiful. So it's like Ernest and Celestine is about how there's a bear's world on, what we would just kind of consider like regular human style civilization. And mice and rats live in the sewers, but they have used their incisors, their massive, wonderful incisors, to create this like civilization for themselves. And they don't like each other because, mice are afraid of the bears, and the bears think that mice are like pests. And like to a severe degree, they do not like each other.
It is very
punishable by law to be seen with another one.
I know, very, yeah. A lot of racism going on.
Pretty heavy-handed metaphor.
Yeah. So, but continue. Sorry.
Well, I was just gonna say, all the cops were white.
Without a doubt.
All the cop bears were polar bears, and all the cop mice were little Sherlock-looking dudes, but they were white mice, like lab mice. You can't tell me that wasn't intentional.
No, yeah, that's on purpose, bro. But the court sequence at the end of the film really reminded me. I know you haven't seen it yet, but Anatomy of a Fall this year.
Yeah,
this movie walked so that movie could run with court scenes,
without a doubt,
dude. It's you can't ignore it.
Okay, I'll look out for that,
dude. Absolutely. But also, I just want to say how precious so many other little elements of this film were. Because yes, it talks about friendship. You should be able to live in unity with one another. But also, it kind of talks about how sometimes you're grumpy and you just need to be reminded that things aren't so bad. Because Ernest wakes up from his hibernation.
He's just a hungry bro.
He's hungry. He can't get any food. Yeah. He's broke,
Man wants some candy.
But he stumbles upon this little mouse who teaches him a life lesson. And his life is bettered by it. And it's just, I want to cry talking about it.
I know, dude. I know. When they say all I want is to spend the rest of my life with Ernest or Celestine respectively. It was like, that was like beautiful. Other movies that weren't another I'm sorry, a movie that wasn't quite so happy was My Life as a Courgette
Courgette. Well, yeah.
or Zucchini
Also-
for my American and Australian listeners.
So before we dive into this, I want to point out how it is impossible to get a hold of this film in the original language.
Original French. Yeah,
Yeah.
I don't know why.
You can only rent it or stream it in English, and that is ridiculous.
Yeah.
Something that's specifically nominated for Best Foreign Language Film at the Academy Awards, and you cannot watch it in said foreign language.
Yeah, it is weird. I don't know what's up with that. I mean, you shouldn't need a VPN to see a movie in its original language.
Yeah, that's
especially one that came out like a few years ago. Like, it's not an old movie.
Yeah, not at all. Another fun fact about this movie, the screenplay is written by Celine Sciamma, and I probably said that terribly wrong, but she directed Portrait of a Lady on Fire, Petite Maman, Tomboy, probably the most prominent French filmmaker right now, or successful, I guess.
Mhm.
So it's cool that she also wrote this.
That is cool. You know, one thing that My Life as a Zucchini really emphasized for me, and I noticed that across the other movies, but the French are depressed.
Or they're more open about it.
They're more open about it,
Yeah.
I guess I should say. And this movie, as well as many of the other movies that we watched, I think, in stark contrast to American demographics, was not necessarily, I mean, maybe the culture is different over there, and it certainly is to certain degrees, but did not seem like one that would be strictly for a child audience.
There's actual nudity in the film.
There is.
Granted, it's a
that's another
child's
thing.
drawing, but
Yeah. Well, that's another thing, actually, is that breasts in French animation are, like, I watched The Painting as well.
Mhm.
And that had nudity.
Fantastic Planet had nudity.
Fantastic Planet had nudity. The Red Turtle, to a small
to
degree,
an extent, yeah.
had like undescribed nudity, but it was like implied.
But it's usually in these situations, it's not like sexual.
It's not sexualized at all, and I
Yeah.
think that absolutely is a cultural difference that I found really interesting.
Mhm.
But the openness to be depressed the way that My Life as a Zucchini is, which, for reference, is a movie about orphans coming together, and well, I guess they're not all orphans, but basically kids bonding and becoming a found family over their trauma, which is like real trauma. I don't want to spoil what makes Mr. Zucchini a part of that family, because
Mhm.
that is a shock factor that I wouldn't want to take away from anybody.
Mhm.
But
Well, I mean, they tell you like in the first, you see in the first 5 minutes.
well, yeah, but I mean, if you haven't seen the first 5 minutes, I don't know,
Yeah.
because I didn't know that was going to happen,
Mhm.
and I was shocked.
Well, me too.
Did you?
Yeah. I didn't know either, but
Yeah. There's an openness to explore depression beyond just temporary sadness
Mhm.
in French animation. There's an openness to certain amounts of nudity that is certainly not sexualized, that is just seems very commonplace.
Mhm.
And those were two elements that I found very starkly different to what I typically see from animation coming out of here in America.
You know something else I noticed about pretty much all these films, which also is pretty common in American animation, but not like as strict of a rule.
Yeah.
Pretty much everything was under 90 minutes.
Mhm.
Like a lot of these films were like 70, 80 minutes long. And with some of them, like the last two we mentioned, I feel like they would have benefited from a longer runtime.
Yeah.
Especially,
I think My Life as a Zucchini definitely could have benefited
Yeah.
from that.
Absolutely. There's so much you can explore about the emotions of these characters with Ernest and Celestine. Who wouldn't want that to be 30 minutes longer? Are you
Yeah.
kidding me?
No, absolutely.
I
Make it 24 hours. I'd watch it all day.
Exactly. Exactly. But even The Red Turtle or Fantastic Planet, I don't think either one of those were longer than like 80 minutes or so.
No. And you're absolutely right, because I know that we've both talked about how we wish that the ending of Fantastic Planet had gone on for,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, at least another 10 minutes, because
Yeah.
there's some really, really interesting things that they imply at the end of that movie, but I would love to see it actually explored. You
Mhm.
know, it's kind of one of those things where sometimes you see movies and it's like, I wish that they had just implied that instead and left it up to the viewer's imagination. That's pretty common amongst horror movies. Whenever you reveal the monster, it becomes less scary. But with these stories, I want to see, there's so much originality, there's so much curation of atmosphere and aesthetic that I want it to continue. And maybe that's also just to the benefit of like the creators of the work, that I couldn't get enough of it, essentially.
Well, this is something that's a pretty common discussion now, where with a lot of things, specifically like for a timely example, the TED TV show, we're not so much in the habit anymore of letting things end.
Yeah.
Everything has to be exploited as much as possible. Like,
it has to be a cinematic universe or a multiverse or blah 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 blah.
Yeah, like there was one tweet that everyone's kind of criticizing where it's like, give us all the Ted, give us, season 1 is this, and then we make another Ted movie and it's him as a parent and Ted as an uncle, and then season 2 is the second half of high school, and season 3 would be their college life, and then movie number XYZ would be this is. We don't need all of that, man. Just let things end.
And to his benefit, I did see Seth MacFarlane comment that he would not make a second season of the new Ted show if there was not appetite for it. So he's not planning to just pump it out. Crazy given his history with Family Guy. But to his benefit, I think he's learning and tempering down a little bit in his age, and maybe just with the times as well.
Yeah, but I don't know. Maybe there's a lesson here that shorter run times might benefit film. Now, if you have a story, continue the story. Absolutely, let it run for 2 hours. Listen, I'm a big fan of movies being 3-4 hours long if they have to. Give me another Lawrence of Arabia, but only if it's for the benefit of the story of the film. And sometimes short and sweet is what you need.
And for the record, Ernest and Celestine lost to Frozen.
I saw one review on Letterboxd. I think it was Carson Runquist, but I don't remember exactly, where it was like insane that Frozen won over this because this movie did way more for snow than Frozen ever did.
And it did.
Bro, 100%.
It made me want to frolic.
Like, I understand the song is catchy and Frozen. Let it go. Absolutely. But they should have let that Oscar go.
Yeah.
I mean,
agreed. Good one, by the way.
Thanks. That was off the dome.
That was great. That was great. But so you made a comment just a moment ago about kind of like short and sweet for impactful storytelling. And that does make me think there are several shorts that we talked about or that we watched in preparation for this. But before we get into that, I do want to talk about Persepolis.
Yeah, dude.
Which is so there's a lot we could say about Persepolis, and a lot we probably will here in just a moment. But before we dive into that, I kind of want your just like raw reaction and kind of opinion.
100% my favorite film that we watched for this episode. I'd say Fantastic Planet is like second place, but it reminded me a lot of a documentary that came out a couple years ago called Flee, which is an animated documentary about a refugee situation where they flee the country. Animated in not the same art style, but kind of a similar one, I guess, like a 2D, like flat drawn animation. And it just really makes you appreciate the importance of storytelling. The importance of the view and perspective and story of every culture around the world, the struggles of everyone. It's just impactful. It's heavy. It's also very funny and light at points. It covers the full spectrum. It covers the full spectrum of emotion. I thought the animation style worked great with it. Yeah, going back to intentionally black and white, right? Yeah. Like this movie was almost entirely black and white because black and white was meant to represent sort of like the flashback, or you see the main character in an airport and it's in color. And you can clearly tell from the point of view on her face that she is reflecting or just kind of like dissatisfied with her current kind of position, and maybe even a little bit jaded towards the world as a whole. And then it gets into the storytelling aspects, flashbacks to her childhood, and then from then on, outside of the few moments you see of her intermittently in the airport kind of reflecting again, it's all black and white. And
Do you want to give us like a small recap
Of like
on
the
just like the general vibe of the general story?
Yeah, I mean, so starts off airport, and then she reminisces her childhood, her upbringing, the all the political unrest, revolution, war in Iran, Iran. I never know which one is the correct
Pretty close.
pronunciation.
Yeah. Iran.
The invasion of Iraq. It goes from
The invasion by Iraq.
Yeah, that's what I meant.
Yeah.
It goes from the late 70s when she's a child up until her 20s.
Yeah.
Really covers every stage of her upbringing. You see how her ideology has changed. You see major events that influence her views, her perspective on things, tastes, everything from politics to musical impressions to writing, like
clothing, self-expression, everything. Like you may have some sense of familiarity with the idea that Iran, used to be a much more liberal place than it currently is. And this story follows one individual's particular experience growing up through revolution and then invasion. And she takes her family sends her off to go spend some time in Belgium.
or Austria. She went to Vienna.
Sorry. Yes, you're right. Where she spends her adolescence, or her like the older aspect of her adolescence all the way through college, and then in her late or early 20s she comes back to Iran because she misses it and feels alienated, well, and quite frankly is homeless for a period of time, and kind of becomes familiar with what Iran looks like post-war in a newly religious and kind of zealous experience before she realizes that this too is not for her. And then she goes to France, and that's the end of the movie. And in France is where, she, I guess, has her adult life, where she develops the graphic novel that inspires Persepolis. So the director of this movie is the storyteller and the person who this actual experience is based off of. And not only that, but this movie is so unapologetic about kind of her telling her truth about her experience that officials from Iran were protesting, not like they had not like a protest, but like the officials protested the release of this film at film festivals and the accolades that it got, because it won tons of awards internationally when it came out in I think it was 2016-ish or something.
It was before. I want to say it was 2011.
It was around then.
Yeah.
But after a year, they kind of gave up. They did a limited release in Tehran about a year after it went out, with 6 scenes removed due to sexual kind of conduct, by their standards, and generally was received very well across the world, except for the people who nations that it kind of depicted in a negative light. I think an incredibly important story and beautifully well done. And I just kind of went off on a tangent. I just thought that was important.
That's the whole
context.
point.
Well, yeah, you're right. I think that's important context to know about this movie, Persepolis. And not only that, but the music was fantastic. I mean, the animation was beautiful. You really connect with the characters. I mean, what else is there to say? Do you have anything else to add? I mean, I feel like I kind of took it away from you.
I feel like you really covered it. We can also say it did not win the Oscar, like pretty much everything else in this episode.
Yep.
But
yeah, what did it lose to? I took a note. Give me just 2 seconds.
I'm giving you
give me 2 seconds.
3 seconds.
I just wrote down that it got a ton of nominations and awards. I did terrible note taking for this movie.
Well, it was tied for the grand jury
for the grand jury at the
Cannes.
Yeah.
What it was tied with, I do not know.
Yeah.
But no, like I said, definitely my favorite film that we watched in preparation for this episode. We also did watch a few shorts, like you said earlier. I think you watched more than I did. I watched like 3 of them.
I watched a couple, but in particular, the ones that I wanted to highlight were the ones that were done by Jeremy Clapin, who is the individual that made the movie in 2019. I Lost My Body, which is a story about a boy who kind of violently gets his hand removed from his body.
I didn't watch
And-
this one, so I don't know.
Yeah, so I'm kind of just rattling off here, but the movie follows this hand's journey to get back to the body that it goes. So like Mr. Thing from Addams Family, or
Yeah.
sorry, the thing or cousin, whatever, the hand.
The hand.
The hand from the Addams Family, you know what I'm talking about, kind of travels across France to get back to its main body. And as it does so, experiences certain textures that remind the hand in a way that only makes sense in animation of the sensations that it experienced when it was attached to this boy as a child. So, for instance, running your hand through the sand at a beach, playing piano, certain textures and things that you can associate with your with life that kind of make you almost reminiscent. It kind of travels that journey. I don't think this movie really makes much of a bigger point other than just being really sweet and adorable, quite honestly. Beautifully animated, and the music is gorgeous.
Well, it didn't sound sweet or adorable. Severed hand and
Which
whatnot.
is why I'm saying it only makes sense to the context. Like it's hard to describe, but directed by Jeremy Clepine. And the point is, Jeremy Clepine also made a couple of shorts that are just insane. I mean, just gut wrenching. I mean, I can't tell you. So okay, so he did Skhizein, I think,
Which goes goes hand in hand with what we were saying earlier about
mental health.
and how
Yeah.
the French are more open about depression. Granted, this wasn't depression they were talking about. They were talking about schizophrenia.
Yeah,
But
just a gorgeous depiction of it, though.
yeah, honestly, heartbreaking.
Oh, absolutely heartbreaking. I mean, again, it's not going to make sense when I describe it until you see it. But essentially, a man gets the story is a man gets hit with a 150-ton meteorite and gets displaced 91 centimeters from his own body.
Not an asteroid, a meteorite.
Not importantly,
Yeah.
as the therapist recounts, that's very important. But really, what it's about is what the experience of having schizophrenia is like, to have these kind of out of body moments, to not feel right within your own body, and to be told that just because a meteorite hit your building and it didn't damage anything of the building, but instead just displaced you 91 meters or centimeters, how there was no real damage. And like, it's very clearly a lot of this is within his head, and he's feeling crazy trying to explain his experience to other people, and he just can't do so. So how in 10 minutes they're able to pull this out? You can find it on YouTube. I don't know if that's the legal route, but that's what we did. I highly recommend. That would probably, I mean, this and Persepolis combined would be like some of the hardest hitting animation I've ever seen in my life.
Yeah. Man, just the scenes where he's at work
Yeah.
or when his mom's trying to call him, things like that, man.
Just trying to function like a human being and being fundamentally unable to.
Because it's one thing to see him go through it while he's in his apartment alone, but
Yeah.
to see it affecting him in the world outside of his apartment walls just makes it a little more real.
Yeah, 100%.
Which is crazy because it's doodles on a page.
Yeah.
But
There you go.
But no, yeah. So those are your two. That was a big splash. Those were your two favorites of the episode. That's what you would recommend, you think?
Yes, they are my recommendations. I will make one small note. Jeremy Clepine also is the director behind, like I said, I Lost My Body. There was one other movie that I didn't get to talk about, which was A Town Called Panic.
Oh, that was the next one I was gonna watch.
Yeah, so it's just, very briefly, this movie goes against everything that we've said about French animation so far. It is nonsense. If you've ever watched South Park, it's very Terrence and Phillip pilled. It is chaos incarnate. A super fun watch. So I just wanted to throw that out there. The person who's behind A Town Called Panic has made a couple of other movies with it. You can find it pretty easily. But I just had to give a small shout out to that. But yes, my recommendation for full feature would almost certainly have to be Persepolis. If you haven't seen Fantastic Planet, it's certainly worth a watch. But Persepolis, and if you're watching a short, Skhizein is, I mean, just I think that it's a crucial watch.
Yeah. Persepolis is definitely my number one pick too.
Yeah.
Just really jived with it. Fantastic Planet is a very close second. But you should watch all of them.
Yeah, you should. And in fact, you can, because not only in the description do we put every movie we talk about in our episodes, but I have recently taken upon myself to create lists on Letterboxd for every movie that we talk about in all of our episodes. So you can go there and make sure that you don't miss one, because we watch a lot of movies for this podcast.
My tag watched for podcast is getting bigger and bigger
Hefty.
by the day.
Heavy.
That was a good plug.
Yeah, thank you. I'm learning how to pick up on the cues. But yeah, you should definitely take a look at that. And our real goal here is to make sure that we're taking a look, obviously, at the heavy hitters of film and kind of discussing the implications there, but also to explore what else is out there, maybe the other underrepresented pieces out there, and make sure that they get a little bit of a highlight as well.
Mm-hmm.
So
that was beautiful, Alex.
Thank you. Before we wrap and kind of do our clink and cheers, is there anything you have to say? Any final notes about just French animation as a whole as we kind of watched?
Yeah, I think it's pretty sick. We constantly I mean,
yeah. What do you want to say?
I mean, we constantly see typical American animation, and then obviously Japanese animation with anime, everything like that, Studio Ghibli. It's really cool to dive into animation everywhere else in the world. We wanted to, we struggled a little bit picking exactly what country we were going to cover for this episode for a bit there, but I think we made the right choice with a very diverse filmography. And I don't know, I'm very excited to dive into other countries too.
Yeah, absolutely. So anytime you see in the title it says exploring whatever, that's kind of us just going out on a limb and taking a shot on whatever is out there, whatever we can find. If you have other pieces of French animation you can recommend to us, please do so. We'd be more than happy to check it out. I know there's still some that we need to watch. There
was a bunch more that I wanted to watch for this episode, but we can only watch so many movies and also
work full-time jobs,
lives, school.
We're both engaged. We got a lot of things going on.
We have weddings anyways.
Not to each other, but anyways. Thanks for watching. Give us a like, give us a follow anywhere you listen to podcasts, and maybe watch us on YouTube.
Still not Apple.
Yeah, fuck Apple.
Bastards.
Yeah, what are they gonna do? All right, cheers.
Cheers to that.